When chaos erupted in my garden, I never expected a possum to be my greatest ally, or my neighbor's biggest nightmare. Can I save her from herself before it's too late? As I stood there, half amused and half horrified, I watched Karen make her mad dash for freedom, her arms flailing in a way that was less graceful gazelle and more startled octopus. I mean, if I'd have known that my morning would include a live-action rendition of a bad B-movie chase scene, I would have made popcorn. But there she was, bolting from my shed like it was on fire, basket teetering in her encumbered hands, her short, frizzy hair bouncing chaotically. In the background, the possum, a small, stocky creature that, let's be honest, had seen better days, peered around the shed door, looking equal parts disinterested and bemused by the entire spectacle. "Hey!" I yelled again, this time with a chuckle escaping my lips. "You're scaring the possum." In true Karen fashion, she completely ignored my comment and barreled toward the side of the house, making a hard left toward the hedge as if she thought it would act as her escape route. This woman had serious determination, and perhaps a misconception about hedge mazes being an actual thing in real life. I shook my head, wondering if she was going to risk a minor injury to keep her prized stash of presumably free garden trinkets. But did she really need to rob me of my peaceful Saturday morning like this? Just as she went for the ultimate leap over the small flower bed, fate had a different plan. The shed door swung back open, and in true slapstick comedy fashion, the possum rolled out, hissing madly, as if it was the king of the world, and Karen was some kind of invading intruder. The sight was enough to halt her in her tracks. There she stood, face to face with a hissing ball of fur. It was either the most absurd scene I'd ever witnessed, or an elaborate prank my friends were playing on me. Honestly, I was half expecting Nina to jump out from behind the tomatoes, cackling uncontrollably. "You've got to be kidding me," Karen shouted in disbelief, her hands still clutching her basket of dubious finds. For a moment, we stood there as if frozen in time, me stifling laughter and Karen, the legendary garden thief, encircled by the mighty possum. But wouldn't you know it, the moment didn't last long. The angry possum waddled forward like a tiny, furry linebacker ready to tackle its opponent. Karen's eyes bulged as she realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't her ideal scavenging mission after all. The basket slipped from her grip, hitting the ground and rolling away, scattering a veritable treasure of expired garden labels and a half-eaten bag of stale chips in its wake. The drama escalated when Karen scrambled backward, nearly tripping over a stubborn azalea bush. "Call your dog," she screeched, panic now etching itself into her features. "Why do you even have a possum in your shed?" Oh, Karen, the complaints were truly what made for good entertainment, weren't they? I chuckled, captivated by the absurdity of it all. Here she was, embracing her fate as a self-proclaimed garden diva. Yet in this moment, she was truly the subject of my humorous daydreams. A frantic diva versus an equally frantic possum. I glanced around, half expecting my real-life audience to show up, popcorn in hand, ready to witness this live comedy duo. "Karen, that's just Percy. He lives in that shed. He's harmless, as long as you don't try to rob him," I quipped, suppressing laughter because I just couldn't take the absurdity anymore. She barely cast a glance my way, her shouting now a mere backdrop to her desperate attempts to remain upright. "Don't just stand there. Do something," she yelped. I realized I had two choices. I could either help her or let the universe reveal its justice. But in that split second, watching the drama unfold became far too enchanting. Without hesitation, I decided to intervene, driven by an innate sense of bravery, or maybe just the desire to see this comedy of errors come to a conclusion. Okay, let's not escalate this," I called out, moving toward her cautiously, like I was trying to bait a wild animal. No sudden moves, just serene vibes. "Let's all just take a breath. No need to provoke Percy." As the chaos naturally began to die down, I wondered to myself whether Karen would ever learn that being entitled wasn't a foolproof plan for acquiring things. Maybe I was about to witness a transformation. A Karen unleashed. Would she manage to escape her possum predicament with some dignity intact? What would we laugh about next? Just as I was approaching, Percy the possum ceased his hissing and instead tilted his head like a confused but curious little gentleman. Honestly, he He was the most composed creature in this entire fiasco. Watching Karen's frantic footwork was a comedic masterpiece, like watching someone dance at a wedding after too much cake. Awkward, yet somehow riveting. I'd half a mind to pull out my phone and capture this splendid piece of art for all of social media to enjoy, tagging it as wildlife encounter gone wrong. Really, how often do you get to see an entitled woman squared off against a disgruntled marsupial? It was practically a reality show pitch waiting to happen. "Why are you approaching him like that?" Karen bellowed. She seemed torn between wanting to scramble backwards towards safe ground and the urgent need to escape the confines of my garden shed. "You should be running away, not walking closer." Her tone dripped with incredulity, as if I was the mad one here and not the girl who had just barged into my shed to steal expired gardening tools. "Trust me, Karen, he's not going to jump at you. Percy's a friendly pose." I stopped mid-sentence, as I realized that the more I defended Percy, the more ridiculous it sounded, given her current end-of-the-world attitude. Honestly, if she didn't calm down, she might just frighten the poor guy into thinking he was a contestant on Survivor Urban Edition. Just then, Percy demonstrated his true character. The brave little champion nonchalantly waddled forward, his nose twitching in curiosity. Apparently, the possum wasn't morose or aggressive. He was just another misunderstood resident of my backyard, trying to make sense of this chaos. It was as if he was challenging Karen. "You think you can just stomp in here and claim my territory? Think again." I couldn't help but chuckle at the contrast. There stood Karen, she of the commanding presence and frizzy hair, confronting a tiny personality with the heart of a warrior. Wouldn't it be hilarious to see an actual duel, a fluff-o-rama showdown between Percy and the very embodiment of suburban neuroses? As I took another cautious step forward, I decided now was as good a time as any to break out my not-so-secret weapon, empathy. "Karen, remember your yoga class? Breathe. Relax. It's just Percy, not a crocodile in your bathtub. Just let the little guy be." Of course, Karen was not the type of person who responded well to yoga recommendations. Her brow furrowed deeper, and the disdain in her eyes was almost palpable. "This is not the time for Zen, Charlie. I'm about to become breakfast for a rabid rodent." I could see her practical concerns surfacing, but judging by the way she was reacting, one might think I had released a rabid wolf instead of an adorable, albeit somewhat intimidating possum. "I promise he's just as frightened of you as you are of him," I shouted, trying to keep the desperation out of my tone. "He won't bite unless you give him good reason." Though at this point, I was wondering whether I was warming her up to Percy or just stressing myself out on her behalf. I could practically hear Nina's voice in my head, animatedly pointing out how absurd it was that I was now the possum's advocate, trying to mediate between this madness. Suddenly, my mind began to build an absurd narrative. What if the possum became her new best friend? Could Percy serve as the official mediator in future yard sales? Somehow, even my wildest imagination couldn't fully capture the genuine ridiculousness of what was unfolding before my eyes. Then, as if the universe decided to add another layer of drama, Percy let out a loud grunt and waddled even closer, almost casually inspecting the remnants of Karen's abandoned basket. It seemed like he was about to declare himself king of this small empire, and Karen, bless her heart, plastered an expression on her face that I couldn't quite decipher. Confusion? Was it respect? Beauty horror? In a flash, she stumbled backward, her feet entangled with the roots of my azaleas, and she crashed against a rosebush as she yelped, "Get him away from me! I don't want to be a possum's lunch!" It was ridiculous. The moment was both classic and hysterical. The entitled titan of the neighborhood reduced to flailing about like a noodle, while a tiny, fuzzy creature commandeered the situation. "You're not in lunch danger, Karen. You're practically begging for a meme at this point." I gestured to Percy, who had found the remains of her disheveled basket and was enjoying a leftover chip, utterly indifferent to the chaos. Amid the laughter bubbling within me, I wondered if I could survive the day knowing she thought I was serious about releasing a YouTube video on her misadventure with Percyco. What a glorious digital slalom it would be. Finally, realizing Karen was not going to be calmed without a serious intervention, I tried my hand in the depths of negotiation. "Okay, let's think of this rationally. I'll grab a garden shovel. Don't worry. It's not for you. And nudge Percy back to safety while you make your grand escape. What do you say? I took another bated breath, fully aware this would either cement my status as hero or catalyze an epic finale to what was already a monument of hilarity. Would she agree to my plan of action, or would she choose to double down on her idea of wrestling the possum for dominion of the shed? Only time would tell. The moment Karen hit the rosebush, I could barely contain my laughter. It was as if a slapstick cartoon had leaped out of the television and into my backyard, as she flailed her arms in utter panic, trying to disentangle herself from the thorns while simultaneously keeping an eye on Percy. The entire scene felt like a surreal comedy sketch gone wildly off script. I could practically hear the laugh track playing in the background as I leaned against the fence, arms crossed, and grinned like a gleeful child witnessing the most entertaining show on earth. "You're just going to be another chapter in this absurdity if you keep going like that," I shouted, shaking my head, watching as Percy, blissfully unaware of the chaos he was causing, munched away at another chip. "Easy for you to laugh, Charlie," Karen shouted, her voice strained as she landed awkwardly beside the rosebush, her colorful blouse now a floral tapestry of greens and pinks that was all too fitting for the situation. "What kind of perverse universe is this where I am trapped with a carnivorous fluffball in your shed?" Her indignation echoed like a battle cry against the audacity of nature. But as I took in the sight of my neighbor, I could see that this was more than her usual entitled rant. She was genuinely terrified. "He's not going to eat you. This isn't a survival horror movie, Karen." I laughed, my disbelief swelling as if I were about to float up to the sky like a balloon of joy. At this point, my mind started racing again, spiraling with the chaos of it all. Images flashed past my imagination of Karen making the rounds in neighborhood gossip, dramatically recounting her perilous struggle at the hands of the ferocious marsupial that invaded her life. I could hear her telling everyone how Charlie the gardener was understandably no help at all. What about the headlines? I thought, picturing a local news report. "Gardener's shed turns into wild animal kingdom. Karen Blanchard caught in the crossfire." With that amusing scenario cementing itself in my mind, empathy began to slip away, making room for a sense of uncontrollable amusement. Why should I not take advantage of this delightful absurdity? I took a bold step forward, attempting to approach Percy with the utmost confidence, trying not to trigger another Karen drama fest. The least I could do was nudge our oblivious guest away from any remaining remnants of her basket without causing another heart attack. "Look, Karen, I'm just going to gently nudge him outside. No need to call animal security or whatever," I promised, flashing her what I hoped was an encouraging smile, even as Percy tilted his head in that adorably confused way he did. "If anything, you should be thanking him for tearing your basket apart. It's all but a new adventure waiting to happen." Furthermore, my words seemed to hover in the air like an enticing aroma wafting from a delicious meal. Karen's expressions fluctuated between bemusement and bewilderment as I inched closer to Percy, whose carefree exploration of the chaos was intoxicatingly hilarious. It was almost glamorous that I dared to mediate the boundaries of nature and suburban etiquette. "Just stay calm. Let's change this from an intruder confrontation to the ultimate gardening therapy session," I joked, although I was beginning to realize that neither of us was equipped with the emotional tools for such a radical transformation. As I began to strategize how to encourage Percy to leave, an unexpected hiss broke through the laughter lingering in the air, an unmistakable warning from the possum that indicated he was decidedly not interested in leaving his newfound snacking zone. "Now that's different than what I was hoping for," I mused, noting how Karen's eyes widened in horror. Wow. Percy really is committed to this chaotic scenario. Meeting the little guy's gaze, all I could do was chuckle softly at the unfolding mischief. I anticipated at least one more unexpected stunt from our furry antagonist before this was over, and scrambling to think of a new plan, I turned back to Karen, who now appeared poised like a sorceress about ready to cast a powerful spell. "All right, if it gets down to it, I'll just have to turn you both into a fairy tale by the end of this." "Charlie," Karen chirped, indignation as bright as her blouse now festooned with rose petals, but a tinge of laughter was creeping into her tone. "You could have perhaps led with that tempting description of fairy tale confrontation. What happens if Percy decides to win the contest? This was about as unexpected as a possum ordering a delivery pizza. I could hardly believe the transformation happening right before me. I saw vulnerability breaking through her tough exterior, and for a fleeting moment, I thought we might share this laugh together amid the absurd meltdown. Well, let's just say I hope he's a good sport, because I'm not about to let you become the laughingstock of the cul-de-sac. I quipped back while inching closer to Percy, still trying to execute my gentle nudging maneuver to redirect his fluffy self back outside. This peculiar confrontation was illuminating a whole new side of my noisy neighbor, and honestly, I was strangely fascinated. Could Karen learn to respect the little wonders of life, particularly one that was a living, breathing, active participant in her dramatic escapade? Or would she remain captured in her entitled chaos? I grinned, watching as she tentatively uncurled herself from the abrasive branches while preparing to reassess her grievances against nature. As I contemplated my next move, Karen, still gripping the doorframe of my shed like a lifeguard ready to save a drowning swimmer, appeared torn between fleeing and taking a stand against Percy's rodent rebellion. You know, Charlie, you really should have invested in a proper shed lock. You can't just let a critter run amok like this, she huffed, as if she were the queen of proper home security and not a trespasser currently evading a hissing, furry turmoil. For a split second, I considered reminding her that the choice to wield a pair of garden shears and parade into my personal property was largely her own undertaking. But heck, why rain on her panic parade when I could ride the wave of hilarity instead? Okay, Karen, but let's look at the bright side. It's not every day you get to be up close and personal with an Australian marsupial. Ever considered a career in wildlife documentaries? I grinned, enjoying my own absurdity as I ventured deeper into the shed like an uninvited guest slipping into someone's party. Of course, Karen responded with that patented eye roll. But was that a flicker of disbelief mingling with amusement that I spotted? Maybe I was losing it. But suddenly, I felt a wave of camaraderie forming, overshadowed by the tumultuous presence of Percy. This possum was the unlikely bridge between our bizarre squabble, stirring up an odd chemistry even I hadn't anticipated. As I tiptoed carefully, avoiding the chaos strewn across the floor, the conflict between my two peculiar companions grew more palpable. I could hear Karen's rapid breathing, a blend of reluctance and exasperation, as Percy, blissfully ignoring the tension, searched for any morsel that may have fallen from her basket. Oh, the irony. Here we were, a mismatched trio conjured by life's unpredictable tapestry. I reached toward Percy with a slow and deliberate motion, half expecting him to either hiss loudly or grant me an honorary possum whisperer diploma. He turned to me, eyes wide and shimmering with curiosity, probably wondering if I was an ally or potential food source. Wouldn't that just be the cherry on top of this absurd cake? Hey, buddy, I murmured, channeling my inner animal therapist, and to my utter shock, Percy seemed somewhat intrigued, his nose twitching, as if he was weighing the options of accepting me into his exclusive possum family. Karen, on the other hand, was watching with an expression that fluctuated between awe and disbelief. You've got to be kidding me, Charlie. Are you actually befriending that monster? It's like letting a raccoon have a sleepover in your living room? Next you'll tell me you're planning to throw him a birthday bash or something. Oh, how I loved her over-the-top flair. It was comical, and though she might not see it yet, she was entwining herself deeper into the very humor she loathed, creating an impromptu camaraderie spun from shared absurdity. With Herculean resolve, I leaned closer, finally nudging Percy gently to redirect him towards the open door. Meanwhile, Karen's eyes were practically bulging out of their sockets, a visual testament to the unusual pressures of entrapment here in my little shed. I should really conduct a blood pressure examination after this, she gasped. And despite the bizarre circumstances, I couldn't help picture her commandeering a clinic, complete with a clipboard and a questionable medical degree. Let's hope you don't need an ambulance on speed dial, huh? I laughed aloud, half invested in the idea of enlisting Percy as a reluctant sidekick in her healing journey. The world could always use more unexpected friendships. The sheer absurdity of our scenario enveloped my laughter just as tightly as the smell of damp wood and metal tools surrounded us. I nudged Percy just right, and he finally relented, waddling towards sunshine and freedom as if emerging from some mythical portal. Karen, meanwhile, watched him with an expression somewhere between dread and fascination. "Do you think he'll tell the others?" she pondered, wide-eyed and far too earnest about a rodent's social life. I had to stifle a laugh. Definitely. Attention, fellow possums. "I survived a face-off with a woman who wanted to borrow tools," I exclaimed, envisioning a community packed with possums who now had a first-rate urban legend to regale. Maybe after this little escapade, we could both join them for a dose of occupational therapy. As Percy disappeared into the wild unknown, I turned to Karen, feeling victorious against the chaos that had for so long felt larger than life. "Congratulations, Karen. Welcome to the absurd side of life, where troublesome encounters lead to weird friendships." Her expression softened just a tinge, as if she were peeking through a window into a world filled with laughter rather than entitlement. All at once, I had an inkling that perhaps, just maybe, this strange bonding moment could foster some understanding, if she were willing to peer even further. Would the wild suburb become the new therapy retreat for both of us, eclipsed by a hissing possum with enough audacity to fuel our next chapter in this eccentric saga? As soon as Percy vanished into the garden like he was on a secret mission, Karen's expression morphed from sheer horror to mild annoyance, her hands planted on her hips like an overzealous crossing guard. "Now look what you've done. That creature is going to run riot and ruin everything," she huffed, as if the possum's escapade was personally targeted at her flower-bed ambitions. I couldn't help but laugh. Here she was, fussing about a plane of chaos lifted straight from the world of reality television. "Oh no, Karen. What will we ever do now that Percy, the possum, has declared war on your tulips?" I chimed, noticing the way a glimmer of humor danced in her eyes, despite her efforts to play it cool. Maybe my tactic of poking fun was actually landing somewhere. Nina, who'd strolled over to witness this wild drama unfold, couldn't contain her giggles. "Is this what you were planning, Charlie? I knew you wanted to spice things up with your gardening, but I didn't know you were inviting possum fitness classes." Her laughter rang through the evening air, the way joyous music tends to attach itself to inexplicably ridiculous moments. Feeling my spirits lift, I turned to Karen, giving her a once-over. "Hey, you could be the star of a new reality show called Shed Scuttles, Possum Edition." Just as I finished, Karen's eyes sparkled with skepticism. "Real entertaining, Charlie. Who needs Netflix when I can watch wild animals scamper on my precious perennials?" Ah, the spark of playful banter was ripe, ready to be harvested under the warmth of late-afternoon sun. We all stood there, inhaling the absurdity of it all. I had managed to transition the situation from one where I expected a melodramatic scene of despair and outrage to a fleeting gathering brimming with laughter. The tension that had engulfed Karen and me had morphed into a camaraderie woven together by some unseen catalyst. Our shared experience with Percy. I could almost hear internal cogs clicking into place within her. "Honestly, Charlie," she said while catching her breath, "you have a knack for being obnoxiously upbeat during chaos. It's almost impressive, even if I can't fully appreciate it yet." I gave her a mock bow, my chest puffed like a proud peacock. "Well, it's a talent I honed while dodging squirrels and PTA meetings." Nina wasn't about to let this moment slip away. She was in full mischief mode and guiding the dynamic with a deft touch. "Okay then, it's settled. You two have officially entered an alliance, fighting off all forms of furry intruders. I guess that means a new neighborhood watch." She chuckled, throwing her arm around Karen's shoulders, which elicited a startled expulsion of breath from my neighbor. Though I could see the wheels turning in Karen's mind, she couldn't help but chuckle a bit. If my divine purpose is now to protect my garden from a hissing vermin army, I might as well command foot soldiers in the defense. Her shift back to her more demanding self felt almost balanced now, not entirely over the top, but with a touch of acceptance. Seeing her more human side emerge through this chaotic event was somehow inspiring and utterly hilarious. What a delightful twist. I couldn't help but think that life had an odd talent for mixing unexpected elements to create wild experiences that colored our daily lives. "If only we could convince Percy to enlist for patrol duty," I stated, igniting further fits of laughter. "Think of the viral potential. Just imagine the hashtags #PossumInArms. And just like that, it felt like we had transformed from adversaries into unlikely allies, sharing a narrative that would spiral into a playful legend amongst the neighborly gossip. As the sun slid lower in the sky, casting a warm orange hue through the garden, I turned to Karen, who appeared a tad less intense than before. Who would have thought that I'd get to witness the birth of the Possum Patrol right in my backyard? I mused, eyes sparkling with wonder at the creative madness unfolding before me. What if I fully embraced this bizarre relationship with Karen? Perhaps her entitled tendencies were simply a cover for something deeper. Maybe our misadventures with Percy could lead us to a new era of cooperation, where even wild entities like hissing possums brought us closer together and reminded us of nature's sometimes chaotic beauty. Let's just do our best not to let Percy convince us to start a possum-only neighborhood, all right? Karen finally quipped, a playful glimmer back in her eyes. Digging into my own reserves of boldness, I could already envision a peculiar future blossoming from this peculiar escapade. As we attempted to comically strategize over how to create an outlandish plea for Percy's indifference while also keeping her flowers looking royal, I couldn't help but wonder where this ridiculous partnership would lead us next. How many more wild adventures awaited in this unforeseen alliance, sparked by a rogue possum with a fondness for my shed? As we huddled in my backyard, still buzzing from the spectacle that had just unfolded, an idea struck me like a lightning bolt. Or was it more of a comical slapstick moment waiting to happen? What if we organize a neighborhood meeting? I suggested, leaning forward with enthusiasm. Think of it. Possum Patrol could be the latest neighborhood trend. We can share our expert advice on how to deal with this new furry friend. The absurdity was contagious, and Nina's laughter echoed in the golden light as she clutched her stomach, barely able to catch her breath. Karen, momentarily distracted from her usual critical self, raised an eyebrow, seemingly intrigued. A meeting? For possums? What are we going to do? Hold a seminar about habitat preservation? And dress up in inventive possum-themed outfits? I shot back, caught in a whirlwind of inspiration. Imagine the creative potential. We could design flyers that read, "Join the fight against wayward wildlife. Bring carrots, not complaints." With each additional suggestion, I felt the branches of my imagination shake a little more with laughter and absurdity. Karen's mouth twitched, and before I knew it, she was smiling. For once, our gardening rivalry felt eclipsed by a shared mission. Before we even knew it, we were co-writers of a spontaneous comedy, with Percy the Possum as our reluctant star. It was like throwing a party that nobody asked for, yet everyone was suddenly dying to crash. As the ideas flowed, Nina, ever the social media maestro, chimed in with a sparkle in her emerald eyes. We can set up an Instagram account for Possum Patrol, where we post updates on Percy's activities and encourage local animals to join. Possum Protector. The thought of the outdoors taking a dive into social media generated peals of laughter. The more ridiculous the scenario, the more contagious the giggles became. I couldn't help but picture them. If the neighborhood came together, standing proud in ridiculous costumes, as they waved spirit banners for the glorious cause of wildlife cooperation, ideas of playful possum physics and adorable costume contests began to populate my mind. An unexpected question crept into my thoughts. What if this is all some sort of cosmic sign? I pondered aloud. Maybe the universe is trying to tell us to step outside of our boxes, using hissing possums as our motivational tool. Just then, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a whimsical shadow that made everything seem even sillier. Karen squinted, probably trying to find profundity in my blather, but the slight rise of her lips was proof enough. The storm of potential friendship was brewing, and it was positively delightful. "Charlie," she began, stifling a giggle, "if your philosophy hinges on possums, your life must be extraordinarily extravagant." Amidst the laughter, I noticed Karen's demeanor shifting. Gone was the bitter neighbor, and in her place stood a woman willing to entertain the madness of the moment. After an invigorating round of brainstorming that sent us spiraling through an array of ludicrous possibilities, we rallied around the charm of our unlikely crusade. It was time to synergize our capabilities, I thought. "Listen up," I announced theatrically. "We are embarking on a quest, a mission of epic proportions. Forget that stuffy old homeowners association meeting. From now on, we shall prioritize our garden over strict regulations and the love for hissing possums." The laughter erupted again, resonating with a camaraderie I never thought possible. As Nina snapped a candid picture of Karen and me, mid-guffaw, her bubbling energy infused the air around us. Hashtag Shed Squad. This is going viral, she declared, a hint of mischief dancing in her eye. I couldn't help but roll my eyes with an exaggerated flair. Oh great, now I'll be known as the neighborhood Possum Whisperer or something. But in truth, I was elated. There was something tender about embracing the madcap spirit radiating around us, turning my humble gardening into an adventurous escapade that could potentially weave itself into the very fabric of our community. As the sun melted away entirely, a small burst of fireworks erupted behind the horizon, as if reacting to our peculiar enthusiasm. It dawned on me that perhaps, just perhaps, the tensions that had long brewed between Karen and me were crumbling like last season's mulch under the laughter of unity. Who would have thought that an unusual confrontation with a hissing possum would sow the first seeds of cooperation and friendship? Leaning back against the shed, I felt lighthearted and alive, ready to tackle the next unexpected adventure waiting just beyond the garden gate. So, what awaited us next in our ever-expanding saga of the Possum Patrol? I couldn't wait to find out. Little did I know that the momentary magic sparked by Karen's reluctant smile was just the beginning of a whirlwind neighborhood phenomenon. The next day, just as the sun peeked through the clouds like an inquisitive child, I discovered our Possum Patrol had grown legs of its own, literally. I was in the middle of my morning coffee ritual, enjoying a moment of tranquility among my green companions, when a flood of neighbors dashed past my garden, clutching homemade signs like furious ralliers at a sports game. Just ahead, Nina waved her arms excitedly, launching the day into a chaotic array of bright colors and eager faces. "Charlie, we're ready to roll," she called out, her laughter mingling curiously with the peeping birds overhead. With hardly enough time to process what was happening, I chuckled to myself and hurried to see the magnificent spectacle unfolding. It appeared the neighborhood's whimsy had taken a sharp turn toward the ludicrous, as Karen stood proudly at the helm of the chaos, wearing a ludicrously oversized possum hat, complete with wiggly ears that flopped every time she moved. "Charlie," she yelled through peals of laughter, "if we're going to protect Percy, our shared fuzzball of authority, this calls for style. And what better way than by flaunting this fabulous headgear?" I couldn't help but crack up. The formerly cantankerous Karen had donned her fortuitous possum hood and embraced her new role like a true champion of the absurd. Just as I thought I couldn't be more amused, the other neighbors piled in with variations of the possum theme. Faux tails braided into hair, bright orange shirts reading "Possum Power," and even glittery capes flapping in the spring breeze. I felt a rush of pride swell up in my chest. Together, we had stumbled into a charming, spontaneous festival. Karen, sporting her newfound bravado like an honorary queen at a bizarre costume party, could not contain her excitement. "Let's do this, everyone," she declared like a battle cry, rallying the chaotic forces behind her. Everyone erupted in laughter and cheers, and I felt an involuntary grin plaster across my face. Before I could ask who was in charge of what, our parade was off and running, sort of. The cacophony of laughter mingled with a lot of chaotic confusion as we started marching down the neighborhood streets. We followed Nina, snapping pictures like wild paparazzi, documenting the ridiculous transformation of our once calm suburban lives. I chuckled at the absurdity of it all, the laughter reverberating around me. "Hey, watch out for that mailbox," I shouted, but it was a case of too little, too late. One overly enthused neighbor nearly toppled the post with the force of her ridiculously oversized possum tail. Who knew that cardboard and wires could wreak such havoc when united in the name of community pride? Just as we approached the park, I spotted a few curious onlookers staring at our merry band of possum-proud people. An elderly gentleman sat on a park bench, raising an eyebrow with disbelief. "Is this a circus?" he asked, curiosity written all over his face. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Nah, just everyday garden enthusiasts in high spirits," I responded back, waving my hands like a fanfare conductor, while the crowd erupted into giggles again. Suddenly, the embarrassment of the initial matchmaking tension I had with Karen felt like a distant memory. Instead, we were participants in a neighborhood drama that would surely be retold for years. The delightful insanity continued as we made our way to a small clearing where the banner, Possum Patrol, Embracing Our Wild Side, was unveiled in a flurry of glitter and colorful streamers. The spirit of camaraderie was growing anew among all of us. Karen and I exchanged a gleeful glance. "Who knew we'd found our calling?" she joked, her smile infectious. As we prepared to kick off our first official Possum Patrol meeting, I took a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all, a gathering no one could have ever anticipated, and a narrative transformed through laughter, ridiculous costumes, and a touch of surreal magic. As the day unfolded, I couldn't help but wonder how this absurd event had cultivated such harmony in a neighborhood where before it felt like the weight of entitlement hung heavy in the air. It was almost poetic. A single hissing possum had somehow sparked a movement filled with joy and community spirit. In that moment, amid the laughter, enthusiastic proclamations, and quirky shenanigans, I realized that embracing the whimsical side of our lives could forge unexpected bonds. Who would have thought that a scuffle with Karen, a persistent storm cloud of overbearing entitlement, would morph into such vibrant, unexpected sunshine? Perhaps all it took was the right blend of absurdity and camaraderie. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over our motley crew, I raised my homemade possum half-mask in a toast. "To Percy, the true star of the show," I proclaimed, reveling in the sheer ridiculousness of what had transpired. With spontaneous cheers erupting around me and the subtle hum of camaraderie enveloping my heart, it became crystal clear. The night had just begun. Together, we would embrace our quirks, love our hissing creature ideals, and write a new chapter in the life of this spirited neighborhood. With laughter echoing through the park, the question might just be how far our newfound friendship and the joy of the Possum Patrol could carry us onward.